Every few years, a gaming franchise is released that goes on to totally change the paradigm of gaming as we know it. But few go on to have such a cultural impact that even the mainstream has to acknowledge its existence. Pokémon was one of the largest gaming crazes the world has ever seen. In the 90s, almost everything had a Pokémon crossover, and knockoff franchises flooded the market in a way only seen when something is truly revolutionary. It is one of the most profitable gaming franchises that has ever existed, and its legendary status amongst gamers has to be respected. It was a groundbreaker when it came to cross-media promotion, and it has left a mark across multiple gaming genres today. This video on Poseidon Films will be an investigation into how Pokémon changed the gaming landscape forever. If you like hamburgers, then be sure to press the like button or Charmander will burn your house down. Pokémon was originally masterminded by a man named Satoshi Tajiri. He had a childhood fascination with collecting different bugs. He had enjoyed this fascination so much that he wanted to take this thrill of collecting creatures into the digital world for a new generation of children to enjoy. You see, Japan had undergone immense industrialization over the decades and lost the nature where these creatures could be collected no longer existed. He teamed up with the legendary Ken Sugimori along with other developers, and they gave birth to the legendary Game Freak Studios. Their first game was something you might have heard of called Pokémon Red and Green version. This game was initially released in Japan and went on to take the nation with a fury not seen yet by a gaming franchise. Within 5 months of release, they had already sold over 3 million copies, and Nintendo even gives Pokémon credit for being one of the main reasons the Game Boy has such strong sales in Japan through its life cycle. This was a shock to Nintendo as they had pretty much no expectations for the series, thinking it would just be another release for their console. Most of the media wasn't interested in covering the release at first. Considering the Game Boy was thought to be near the end of its life cycle, it just didn't seem important. Originally, the blue version of the game was supposed to be an internal version that fixed a lot of the initial bugs the release saw. Once Nintendo executives discovered an improved version of the game existed, they demanded they release it to the public. They decided to do a release where only mail order copies of Blue could be ordered, and they ended up selling over 600,000 copies of this new edition. It was clear to Nintendo at this point that they had a massive hit on their hands and they wanted to expand its marketability. They released an accompanying trading card game which took off in Japan. It was largely influenced by Magic the Gathering, but had its own spin on combat. This also took Japan by storm, and at this point it had become one of the largest media entities within the nation of Japan. Which is known for its deep history of valuable gaming franchises, it isn't like this was some unsaturated market where anything would have had this level of popularity. The success of the game and the trading card game was also what influenced the production company to start making the anime. No major gaming franchises had an attached media show to help act as free marketing. It helped that his Pokémon anime would go on to be one of the most famous shows in the world. Nintendo was originally nervous that if the show ended up being unpopular, it would also hurt the game sales. They were told that they had nothing to lose and took the gamble with releasing the show. It ended up being the most popular show in its time slot, and was the third head on the unbeatable Pokémon Dragon. All of these different arms worked as crossover marketing for the other aspects of the franchise, which worked to promote the game to an insane level. While Pokémon may have done this by accident, the impact it had on gaming cannot be understated. Franchises now dream of a world where they have multiple avenues to sell merchandise and cross-promote their products. Most franchises aim to have something attached to their titles that can make it more accessible to the mainstream. Look at how many gaming studios are now lining up to have any of the streaming studios produce a show to go along with their intellectual properties. Pokémon had stumbled upon a goldmine that would go on to be the best-selling video game series of all time. By this point into Pokémon's growth, they had become the hottest thing in Japan, and now Nintendo was aiming to take the franchise international. The United States and Japanese gaming markets have always been deeply linked, so Nintendo decided to try their hand at releasing Pokémon stateside. There was already an existing market of gamers with Game Boys, and on top of that, there had usually been crossover of game interests. They started to do market research into how the game would be received by the domestic market. Market research initially said that American kids were not going to be interested in Pokémon, but Nintendo decided to ignore these reports and commit $50 million promoting the franchise in the United States. They dubbed the anime to make it more appealing to domestic audiences, and then launched in 1998. The show was a huge hit, and the Pokémon fever spread across the United States with kids purchasing the game in droves. The popularity of the show and the game was driving demand stateside for the card game to be released as well. The hype for the trading card game was so large that people were placing pre-orders when its release was announced. Red and Blue sold 200,000 copies in its first month in America, and the anime had become the highest-rated children's show in the country. The popularity of the franchise ignited a bidding war from most of the largest television networks in the country, and they were willing to pay almost any price to be the network that had Pokémon premiering weekly. In 1999, the anime launched on WB Kids and was the largest debut in the history of the network. The game went on to sell millions more copies, and the trading card game launch was equally incredible. By March of 2000, Pokémon had sold more than 4.2 billion cards, and the period of huge interest in Pokémon was given the nickname of Pokémania. Toy stores couldn't keep up with the demand, and supplies of 600 booster packs would sell out in less than 24 hours constantly. The demand was so strong that Pokémon had exhausted most of the card printing capacity in the United States in order to keep up with the orders. This artificial scarcity spawned a network of resellers who would flip games and cards to desperate collectors trying to get them all. This sent profits into the sky for Nintendo. They saw a profit increase of 250% in 1999 alone. Many businesses were sending them millions in exchange for being able to use Pokémon in their merchandise. The peak of Pokémania came with the release of the Pokémon movie in November of 1999. While many critics didn't love the movie, it went on to be one of the most profitable Japanese movies ever created. Burger King had struck a deal to put Pokémon toys in their meals for the movie, and it went on to be one of the most successful fast food campaigns of all time. At some point, the sheer amount of hype began to die off, and while most games end up being a shell of their former selves just months from their peak, Pokémon re-engineered their strategy to be able to perform better for the long haul. They released Pokémon Silver and Gold in 2001 and focused on maintaining the quality of their trading card game alongside their show. A lot of companies would cash in way too hard during a craze and totally saturate the market. Nintendo pulled off the gas pedal strategically to allow themselves to have a slow burn in the market instead of a blaze of glory. While it was not as popular as it was at the peak of Pokémania, each release continued to sell tens of millions of copies. As of now, it literally is the best-selling video game franchise of all time when all entries are combined. The video games also spawned a video game competitive scene, which Pokémon embraced with open arms. They understand that the more facets of the game that are accessible to new demographics, the more successful their trajectory is in the long term. The period from 2002 to 2016 was filled with successful generations of games alongside strong merchandising revenue. They produced dozens of movies, and the franchise was still chugging along with die-hard supporters that left Nintendo with billions in profits. It helps to be directly integrated with Nintendo. Pokémon games end up being very well suited to run on whatever the newest Nintendo console is. While the DS series of handhelds are legendary in their own right, they pale in comparison to the amount of sales the Switch has generated. Whenever Nintendo goes through a period of a large increase in sales, naturally, Pokémon is able to get a huge boost from that. You can see the impact of this in the gaming space with Microsoft scrambling to buy developers and bring popular franchises in-house. It is a smart business model to have popular franchises under your direct control to boost console sales and also have better association in the consumer's mind. Pokémon had been incredibly popular from the jump, but something would occur in 2016 that would lead to it having a massive resurgence in popularity once again. In 2016, they released the game Pokémon Go, which became the starter of a second worldwide Pokémania. The game was the most downloaded app of the year, and it was reportedly making over $10 million a day for the first 2 months of its release. It beat every single record that existed for most profitable mobile app by a huge margin, and it took just months to do so. It was a huge phenomenon in the world that year. Whenever you went to the park, you would see dozens of people wandering, staring at their phones, trying to catch the best Pokémon. Even my parents bought into the hype and ended up playing Pokémon Go for a short period. While this hype didn't last forever, Pokémon Go still has a die-hard community that purchases raid passes regularly. It may be much less popular than it was in the past, but it definitely is still doing well with millions of monthly active players. If Pokémon Go was a standalone game, then it would be one of the most successful games in existence. But because Pokémon is just such a behemoth, it becomes a small aspect of a much larger machine. If something generating $600 million a year in revenue is a small part of a franchise, then you're doing something incredibly right. Pokémon got another boost of hype with the success of the Switch. The Switch is in position to become the best-selling console of all time. It can be used in a handheld manner, which is where Pokémon has always shined the brightest in terms of gameplay. It has outsold the DS family in every single metric. And as I mentioned early, Pokemon's direct integration with Nintendo means that they benefit directly from this. While some fans think Pokemon has lost its way with recent iterations, the numbers show that they are still some of the best-selling games of the year every time they are released. I do think that they need to do their best to work hard on the next title to engage some fans who have become disillusioned, but the franchise definitely isn't in trouble. It also is nice to see them trying to branch out into other forms of games. Pokemon Legends. Arceus was a cool attempt to change up the Pokemon world and tell stories outside the main scope of the games. I think that it did leave a lot to be desired in terms of overall experience, but honestly, Nintendo being willing to branch out with the Pokemon universe will eventually turn out a hit if they keep trying. Look at how successful Mystery Dungeon was. No one saw that coming in terms of its success. The Pokemon franchise has so much power that they will continue to experiment with it and turn out something that will have a die-hard base within its own right. While the game is doing well, the trading card game also had a resurgence during COVID, and the Pokemon Company had some of the highest sales they had since the original Pokemania. The competitive scene in the trading card game is very developed and has its own ecosystem that has popularity. People also have started to collect Pokemon cards like assets, investing in rare cards and viewing them as a retirement fund alongside a cool collection. Card values have dropped from their peak, but the amount of ways people are invested in the franchise is truly impressive. You can't name any other franchise that has this amount of die-hard fans. So many people have Pokemon tattoos, merchandise, and memories that I think it has to be one of the most successful media franchises to have ever existed. They also have had some success branching out into live-action movies. Detective Pikachu was a box office success, and the way they blended live characters into the Pokemon world was very well done in my opinion. There is huge potential for Pokemon to spawn a movie franchise that could bring in billions of more dollars to Nintendo. They have had success, and once you have the ball rolling, it is a lot easier to justify further investment into those sectors. Overall, I think most gaming companies are very envious of the position Pokemon is in. They sit as a franchise that has a built-in die-hard fan base, several sectors generating massive amounts of revenue, and community goodwill not really given to other studios. I think Pokemon is the blueprint that all gaming studios are trying to replicate. It has been around for decades now, and while most studios have to constantly innovate brand new franchises, Pokemon is a money printer for the Nintendo company that never seems to run dry. The way games launch and try to manage cross-promotion is directly related to Pokemon's success, and small things down to monetization tactics are influenced by the behemoth Nintendo has created. Certain franchises have come close to the top of the mountain, but as it currently stands at the top of gaming Mount Olympus, there is a bronze statue of Pikachu looking down, and everyone down below trying to become as successful as he has. That is how Pokemon changed the gaming forever. If you enjoyed the video, we would really appreciate you pressing the like button and leaving a comment with your favorite Pokemon. It helps the video do better in the algorithm, and we're trying to hit 10,000 subscribers this year, so we will take all the help we can get. If you like gaming videos like this, you should check out the one we put out last week about the disastrous downfall of Duke Nukem Forever, the game that spent 14 years in development. Thank you for watching.